No, Janine has a song called Humble Me, and in that song she says, the more that I grow, it shows the little that I know. And this individual that we're going to be speaking with this evening, I've reached out to Arielle John, to get some of these 20-minute meals, food for thought, some of these people to speak with. And I finally feel that I'm kind of ready to share that space with her. So I'm grateful to you, this writer, arts educator, slowly living into her manifestation as a healing arts facilitator. Welcome, Arielle John. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, DK. It's an honor to be here with you today. Thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is mine. But I want to talk, I want you to start, I want this conversation to start with regard to evolution, because it seems over a little period of time and hearing what people have said, seeing some of the things, doing research to speak with you, there's been a very evidenced evolution of self or style or even approach to what it is you do. So however
Yeah.
you want to tackle that topic, tell me a little bit about your evolution, thanks.
Yeah, I think I chart my revolution, my, ooh, see, that wanted to come out. My evolution through my sense of self as recognized through spirituality. That has always been kind of like the cornerstone of my life. And so it's a space that has remained constant, but is always changing. So I would have started out in a very, kind of peculiar but wonderful community of Sangre Grande. And I was raised in, my family is very active in the Catholic Church, and that's how I was brought up, and that really set a firm foundation. Um, However, the ways that we practice Catholicism in Sangre Grande it's very village-like. It was very country-like, and so um, the idea of religion or worship or anything like that pertaining to the divine was centered in the ways that the people wanted. It was in expression, it was in drumming, it was in dance, it was in music, and it was in full expression. And I feel like those modes of celebrating life and celebrating the divine have always been a part of who I am as a result. And so that has kind of evolved and turned itself into the work where I find myself now, where I am now in service to other people in communities. I'm no longer in Sangre Grande. And kind of pivoting to offer the same space for people to come into full expression of themselves or full recognition of themselves, and the places that they can locate joy, locate their truth, locate their honest expression in reverence to themselves and in reverence to the divine as well. I think that's the easiest way I could perhaps sum it up for you.
And I like the fact because I keep hearing some words coming out from what it is you're saying. I hear
Uh-huh.
service, I hear
Mm-hmm.
community, I
Mm-hmm.
hear things that would lead to rituals and ways of
Mm-hmm.
being. But with that
Mm-hmm.
in mind, I want to ask about from your perspective, the importance of arts administration. And I say that seeing that you've been a very involved in that sphere since at least
Yeah.
2015 with the Two Cents movement.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
Mm-hmm.
know sometimes people say, okay, well, that left brain, right brain kind of coming together is not necessarily
Yeah.
the easiest thing for people. And I also know
Not.
some people say, if I'm not looking at the dollars, I'm not looking at the cents. And also looking at how that ties into being able to bridge that. What is your take on the importance or whether or not it's something that's as necessary as we may be putting value towards?
Yeah. I'm still finding my way around in terms of having worked in organizations before and now having my own kind of space to operate. And I'm trying to figure the ways to balance, like you were saying, balance those two things of being in service and wanting to give and outreach and community, as well as like, having a livelihood that is comfortable and that is sustainable. In the past, I have found myself in spaces where if I am managing an artist or group of artists, I am still at the core engaging with a person who has needs, who has desires, who has goals, and wanting to see them attain like their best reality or their best selves. It's still a pursuit of a higher order. So in terms of funneling what I've done, I also have a background in law as well. So there's a kind of, I do have a kind of academic grounding as well. Whereas, you know, my work would seem, what is the word that they usually say? Not airy fairy, but I don't know. It I think what I'm doing now kind of operates outside of the confines of what we think as academic. But I have had mentors who have allowed me to stretch those parameters, who have allowed me to see like, yeah, these two have an important interplay and an important balance. And they're not at all separate, because ultimately, if we're wanting to create the world that we want to see, it has to be an integrated approach. It has to be a holistic approach where, okay, you have the academic, you have the financial, you have the spiritual, you have the emotional, you have the physical, like all of these things. I think is important that they be blended for our community development and for our personal development as well.
I remember somebody telling me, sometimes if you have a big breath, you're able to get depth because you're able to see similarities, or you're able to make connections where other people who are just diving down in something that's so specific may not be able to see and can be locked in their silos. But I like the fact that you bring up some of your academic grounding, because that leads me to ask, what to you is the importance of research in your process? And this may be you specifically, or you may want to go a little more general with it. Because I see you also studied community theater, this community theater model in Johannesburg. You were lucky to do that?
Yes. So can you just repeat the question part of that for me?
How important is research to your process as an artist, as someone who is facilitating healing, just generally what you do?
Yeah, so the research element for me is, for us as post-colonial people, kind of making sure that we recognize the things that have been encoded into our culture. We recognize the forms that we have existing like naturally in this space, that we kind of, my process is one of re-indigenizing. And if we are returning to the indigenous, which is all that means, which is to also simplify it, it means that we have to really tune in deeply into everything that our ancestors would have left us. And how do you do that? For me, it comes through research. It may not necessarily be running, you know, vast internet searches or sitting down in a library for hours, but it also means communion with elders. It means returning to sites of these kinds of energies and powers, and, you know, just being there, being in this space, absorbing from this space, absorbing from people, their stories, what they have to contribute. So that's how the research part factors into me, my development and my work, right? It means really reclaiming these tools that we've been given, they've been here, and it's just a matter of recognizing them, understanding their importance to us and how they can serve us in the now, and a way to kind of really preserve them for the important tools that they offer us.
And I really like the fact that you speak about not necessarily say, okay, well, I'm going to dive down in Google or the University of YouTube, because many times you would find people who have content or information on a subject, but they don't necessarily have as much insider knowledge. So I remember somebody, they gave a treatise on Bob Marley, and somebody was telling them a little after their presentation, genteel English professor, very light in hair and skin color, and saying, well, I loved your talk, but there's one thing that you got wrong. Bob Marley, he said, we flowered in this generation as opposed to forward. And flowered is a word and there's a meaning, but forward is also something, and he didn't have that inside information to go through.
Right.
And you find many people kind of like sit at the feet of elders, then take their information, and then they become the expert without that insider knowledge and that idea of nuance.
But, and that's also our way, DK. That's how we have passed on knowledge for generations, right? Like, I don't see how that loses importance in the now. It's just as important as it was before. We're not necessarily people of books. We're people of stories. We're people of narration. And that is part of my work as well. It's something called narrative healing, whereby you kind of find these thorough lines, you find these conversations, you find these exchanges with the people in your community space, and you then are able to examine, okay, what needs healing here? what do we need to focus on? What are the things that have been with us from time immemorial that is still with us? And, you know, for lack of a better word, we haven't found ways to supersede them or to move past them. And that is one of the, that's why the art is important to my work, because that work of storytelling and story sharing, right? And curating spaces for that is really important to me in our people's moving forward.
And once again, you talk about space. And we're going to get into that on the other side of the conversation. But stay with us. We are speaking with Arielle John. You do not want to miss it. Welcome back. We are speaking with Arielle M. John. And Arielle, healing, space. How do those two words or concepts go together in your mind, from your perspective?
So when I think of space, I think of being in the Atlantic. I call it a vortex in my head somewhere. But just being part of the Caribbean, being in this Atlantic region, I think we are special. I mean, you know, everybody feels they're special, and they are in their own special way. Here we go. However, in this space, because of our historical background, because of the things that would have happened here, we have a diversified group of people occupying one single island territory, especially when you narrow it down to Trinidad and Tobago, right? And we have so many different perspectives. We have so many different ethnicities, religions, backgrounds, genders. The kind of plurality that we have here is something I've always been interested in tapping into, to provide us with this kind of multiverse of remedies, or this kind of multiverse of practices and techniques and that sort of a thing. So the idea of space also for me is like the natural environment. I try to spend as much time as possible in green spaces and spaces where I could just connect. I could walk barefooted. I could just be with the earth, you know, just a river, a forest. Those have become sites of refuge for me, particularly in these times, you know, inside of a global pandemic. And so for me, that is also part of the wealth that we have in the Caribbean. We do have these kind of natural sanctuaries that exist for our own healing and process as well. So this, and of course, the third one I would offer is the internal space, the inside space, which is also, I think, meant to be a place of refuge for us at the end of each day. And cultivating a certain level of balance, a certain level of peace, a certain level of understanding and integration within the self. For me, that is the foremost space of cultivation in my experience. That's the one that takes the priority for me.
And I want to know, if you didn't talk about the internal space, I would have been very surprised, Arielle. But in terms of taking those ideas, those concepts, and juxtaposing them with two things. I heard that you were looking for the West Indies of the future, and I juxtapose that while being steeped in the ritual of the now. How does space, especially that internal space, figure into that kind of search and that inward stretch for that outward reach?
So in terms of seeking out that West Indian future, we as people who have descended from the enslaved, who have descended from the indentured, people who were, you know, taken away from their homelands and placed in a new context, the idea of using an imagination to be able to dream the possibilities of existing as a free person, as a person without constraints, as a person without somebody, you know, issuing violence against you. For me, we have always been in the midst of creating possibilities through our imagination. And then for me as a person in the now, it's important for me to visualize the kinds of futures that I want to embody, the kind of prosperity that I want myself and my kin and community to embody and to, but what when we talk about wealth in this space, sometimes we start to think about capitalism and we start to think about money and we start to think about all of those things. However, in my imagination, it's communal. We own the means of our production. We're creating things. We're working in tandem with the earth, with the ecosystem, and we are living in this frame of abundance, right? So when I think about imagining the future, these are the things that I dream into reality through my word, through my language, through dreaming together with the people that I work with, that I move forward with. Yeah, and that's the role in terms of right. So by working on these things together and holding these visions together, we're then able to kind of implement it and root it down into the earth, root it down into reality, right? And that's how I've been creating this whole time. And that's how it ties back to my artistry as well. Like my professing of as a spoken word artist, of the kind of world that I want to see, both internally, externally, for myself and for the community that I serve. You know, by being able to, what is it? It's called oracular activation, which is one of the pillars of my company. It's just calling it in and watching it unfold and being alive to the miracle of each moment as it unfolds as well.
And you started it. I'm very happy. And you see, both of us, I could have put money that you would have been wearing blue, so I tried to compliment you a little bit today. But
Love it.
with regard to that creative, exercising the creative imagination, with the last 2.5 minutes, I want to go into the company that deals with Carib-centric healing practices that apply storytelling, creativity, and movement to activate personal power. Last 2.5 minutes, Arielle John, what is Blue Oracle about?
Blue Oracle is a healing arts company that works with individuals, and we work with communities and as well to center our healing process. I feel like in this space in particular, most of us are trauma survivors in one way or another. And within a pandemic setting and even beyond now, our trauma threshold, I feel, has risen significantly, right? We all have been in spaces where we felt under strain, under stress, and in the overwhelm of just having to survive in the everyday. So Blue Oracle tries to take all these big feelings and break it down through arts intervention. And my particular direction inside of this is definitely writing, journaling, movement, which is something that's a bit newer to me, but a process that I find really freeing and liberating. And so we've been having monthly full moon dances each month. It's called movement meditations. And where we come together as community, a few of us each month, because obviously we have to operate within COVID restrictions, right? To just use Caribbean music, use music of the diaspora, and just move that energy around the body and then release it. Release everything that no longer serves us. So that's what Blue Oracle is about. It's about healing our people.
And for people who are seeking that healing and trying to contact Blue Oracle, how do they do that, Arielle?
Yes, so you could reach us via email, blueoracle888@gmail.com, or you could give us a call on 264-1698. On the social media, we're at Blue Oracle Community. And yeah, you could reach out to us, reach us with any questions you might have. And if you want to join our events, we have a page both on Facebook and Instagram on the same handle.
All right, so we want to thank you so much, Arielle, for making the time and just doing what it is you do and holding on to that truth and carrying people along for the ride, with giving them space and forming that community of like-minded individuals. But
thank you, DK.
And on behalf of the entire news team, I'm DK Ronstadt. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.